verses 19 and 20, Solomon wants us to embrace the reality of the sinfulness of our hearts. Embrace the reality of the sinfulness of our hearts. Let me just read this next section of verses 19. A righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. Do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. All right, so what does Solomon have to say? How does this sort of bring to the forefront in our hearts and minds the reality of the sinfulness of our hearts? Well, look at verse 19. This is what Solomon is stating in no uncertain terms. Wisdom is a great personal asset, right? Solomon has been both in Ecclesiastes admitting the futility of sort of figuring all of life out, and yet at the same time he holds in tension this reality that wisdom, that to live in the fear of the Lord is of great personal advantage. This is the only way to live in a world like this, is to live in the fear of the Lord. And so he says that wisdom is a great personal asset. He wants us to acknowledge wisdom's great benefit. And he says it like this: it's better than 10 rulers who are in a city, right? And we know the benefit of counsel, and the picture here perhaps of an Old Testament city of the reality of 10 rulers who have all of this experience, and they have all of their Old Testament degrees in managing cities and all of the things that were involved in the in the ancient Near East. And Solomon says, no, wisdom is better than that, right? It's sort of like what the psalmist says when he says, I have more wisdom or more understanding than all of my counselors because I have meditated upon your statutes, right? That biblical wisdom is like that. If you know God and know His Word, that's better than all of the wisdom of all of secular counselors. Wisdom's a great asset. Verse 20 is going to hit us from the other angle. Wisdom's good, but own this fact: despite the benefit of wisdom, you are still a sinner. Verse 20. If there was any quotation, I don't think the New Testament actually quotes verbatim from the book of Ecclesiastes anywhere. We have lots of allusions to it, but certainly Paul's comments in Romans chapter 3 alludes very closely to what Solomon says here. Look at is impacted by the fall. All of us are disoriented in our affections and our allegiances. One commentator in regards to this verse states this: all who possess wisdom will recognize that residue of the old Adam lurks in every regenerate life. In other words, Solomon wants us to grapple with the fact that of all the good that wisdom gives, at the very core of fallen humanity is we are sinners. We are those who, apart from God's grace, have wrong loves and wrong desires. The impulse of our heart is toward sin. And that's a realism that we have to live with in this world. And the way that he sort of presses that point, I think, is really, really instructive. How does he make that so clear to us that even in spite of the great benefit that wisdom is, we still are sinners? And even as Solomon, I think Solomon was regenerate, and we can look at Solomon's own life to see his own mistakes in life, but just this sort of humbling reality in the way that we interact with people, the way that we even consider our own selves, right? We can't manipulate God with our righteousness or with the exceptions to judgment coming for our wrongdoing. Solomon wants to grasp us. We are sinners, and here's the way that he sort of sticks this to us. Verses 21 and 22. The prime example is this: your tongue. Don't take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you, and your heart knows that many times you yourself has cursed others. Isn't this an appropriate example to manifest and to remind us of our sinfulness? You've heard, and no doubt, and it's always painful, right, when you hear someone speaking ill of you, maybe not even explicitly ill, but just commenting perhaps on your own weakness or your own failures. And Solomon says, when you hear that, be reminded that you yourself have done that. Be realistic when you hear someone speaking ill of you. You've done it as well. In fact, what New Testament passage could we go to but James chapter 3, verses 1 to 12, and we wouldn't read all those verses, but just listen to James say this: we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle his whole body. The tongue is, according to James, that untamable beast, full of deadly poison. And James says that it is able to set your whole life on fire and is itself set on fire by hell. And so what's the point? Again, it's pointing us to the reality of our words. It's such an expression of our own heart. In fact, Jesus directs us to that in Matthew chapter 15, verse 18. Remember, Jesus says that it's out of the heart. You don't have to look far. In fact, you don't have to look anywhere. Just listen. Just spend a little bit of time listening to what people say. Spend a little bit of time recounting on those the very unkind words which erupted out of your heart. Maybe even this morning. Recognize that is just evidence of the true condition of our heart. We are sinners. And even those who know the grace of God in Christ have that residue of that old Adam that is still present in our experience. All of these maybe trite words, insignificant, forgotten, are clear symptoms of the deep disease of our soul. And that's fundamental to the world that we live in. Don't miss that. So what does Solomon say beyond that? If he wants us to embrace the fact that we can't manipulate God based upon whether our good actions or neglecting the punishment that comes, we can't. He wants us to embrace, but more than that, and I think sort of culminating of human sinfulness. What does human sinfulness lead to? Listen to verses 23 and 24. This is what I think Solomon says in these verses. He admits that human sinfulness is beyond human comprehension. Look at verse 23. All of this, and remember, Solomon has just been reflecting upon human life and behavior and righteousness or wisdom and wickedness and sinfulness. And he says this: all of this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? Notice those words? It's far off, deep, very deep. Who can find it out? This is beyond human comprehension. In other words, Solomon's attempt to sort of understand and put together all of these realities about human sinfulness and human behaviors, this reality evades him. I think part of the picture here of, again, I think that we can compare Old Testament wisdom literature is the way that Job 28 talks about the search for wisdom. And Job 28 is this sort of wonderful passage where Job talks about wisdom being in the depths of the earth, and he talks about like entering into a mine for gold or for silver. Not too long ago, my wife and I watched the first in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and over a span of several days, right? Because it's very long. But one of the aspects of the cinematography is the fact of when they go into the deep parts of the earth, and it's just darkness and cavernous. And Solomon says the answer is deep, very deep. Who can find it out? Who can go that far to understand it? Is what Solomon says. So I think this is the point of what Solomon is saying, is that there are incomprehensible evils in this world. There are incomprehensible evils in this world. Have you ever stopped to think about that? The word for this is atrocity. In an extremely wicked or cruel act, typically one involving physical violence or injury. Let me just give you a few things to think about, maybe to just recall what I think Solomon is saying here, that this present, very clear reality from the life outside the garden. The Nankine Massacre, December 13th, 1937, occurred over a period of 6 weeks. The day that the Japanese captured the Chinese city of Nanjing. During this period, soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army murdered Chinese civilians and disarmed combatants who numbered an estimated 40,000 to over 300,000, and they perpetrated widespread rape and looting. Or the Holodomor. This is the Ukrainian word for killing by hunger. This was Stalin's man-made famine of Ukrainians, killing millions in the years 1932 to 33. Right? If we had more time, we could search the history books and just be amazed at what Solomon says here, that the depth of human depravity, human sinfulness. It is beyond comprehension. And then he says this, I think, in verses 25 to 29. This is the way I would sum up these verses. Human sinfulness is beyond human remedy. Human sinfulness is beyond human remedy. Look at verse 25. I turned my heart to know and to search out and to seek wisdom and the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. Notice the context here. Solomon is wrestling with wickedness and folly. He wants to understand the wretchedness of sin in the fallen world. Remember, Ecclesiastes is all about contemplating life in the world that we live in, cursed because of sin. And Solomon says, I'm gonna find this out. And his search turns, in verse 26, to the quintessential example of the alluring and captivating power of humankind's sinfulness. So look at verse 26. Solomon's words are here. And I found, in his search, he found something more bitter than death. The woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. What's Solomon doing here? I think he's doing this. He refers to a woman, and you remember that Solomon in Proverbs chapter 9 talks about two women, right? He talks about women, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. And we note that Lady Wisdom is a lady, a woman who is out there calling unto the simple, right, to give wisdom. And Lady Folly is there also. In fact, the language that Solomon uses in Proverbs connects Lady Folly with language that evokes the same language in Proverbs 5, 6, and 7 of the language of the adulteress. Remember in those chapters, I think chapter 7 specifically, the picture of a lad following the allures of the adulteress. This clear example of the folly of human sinfulness. And Solomon's language is so explicit. It says, as that man goes to her, he goes as an ox goes to the slaughter. Or another reference, he talks about an arrow piercing the liver. I remember one far more experienced hunter than myself, commenting on a liver shot. He said, it's always deadly, but it's excruciatingly painful and slow. And so Solomon evokes all of this language, and I think picturing here for us the irrationalness of sin and the pain of it. Why does he do this? He evidences the disorderedness of human desires. I think part of what Solomon, when we see both comparing these passages in Proverbs 5, 6, and 7, and this passage in particular, he uses this language, is he demonstrates to us the irrationalness of sin. It shows that sin does not operate outside of us, not some force that operates outside of us, it's inside of us. James, again, says it like this: we desire and love the wrong things. We are lured, James 1:13 and 15. We are lured and enticed by his own desire. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. And Solomon makes this clear connection in the book of Proverbs: the folly of adultery. It's departing from the good and right thing and taking hold of something that in the end kills you. And that's what Lady Folly is portrayed as here, captivating sinners. And notice that he says this, he talks about the one who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. And you remember that Solomon has already stated that there is no person who does not sin. In other words, every person has from the womb embraced and lives out this desire for folly, for wickedness, for sin. Then he goes on, sort of culminating here, I think, in verse 27. This is what he's found. Behold, this is what I found, says the preacher. While adding one thing to the other to find the scheme of things. In other words, how to put all these things together, which my soul has sought repeatedly. And just notice how Solomon's words are words that indicate that he has worked and labored to know all these things. But I have not found. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. What's Solomon saying in these verses? I think and most commentators admit some difficulty here in these particular chapters of Ecclesiastes. What does he mean? I think that the main point is that Solomon is on the search to put it all together of human sinfulness and human depravity. And the bottom line is this. Verse 29, see, this alone I found, God made man upright. And you notice that the Hebrew word that Solomon uses here for man is the word that is also used in Genesis chapter 3 for Adam. They have sought out many schemes. He concludes with an affirmation of human sinfulness after the fall. In other words, this is what I think Solomon is pressing upon us. Life outside the garden is difficult, it is frustrating, it is painful. But it's not because God is mean. No, difficulty and the hardship of life is this fact. It is the fact that humankind, us, mankind, we are sinners. And King Solomon wants us to own up to the fact that the painful reality of life results from our own human rebellion. That ultimately mankind, as it resists its creator, so the creation, which we were intended to rule over, resists us. Right? That's the picture that I think Solomon is giving here. There is no remedy in all of humankind that can sort of remedy this human sinfulness. Solomon has just used all of these words and descriptions for this search and culminating upon this verse 29, God made man upright, but they, all of Adam's descendants, from Adam himself onward, from his fall, have sought out many schemes. They have sought out many schemes. So this is the grim picture of the real world. Right? And I would just point out to you as New Hope Bible Church that this is a truth that the Bible holds up as absolutely imperative. The Bible cannot live without this truth. The gospel cannot live without this truth. You notice that what I think Solomon is reflecting here is what Paul in Romans chapter 5 is reflecting. Verses 12 and following, Romans chapter 5, a passage that we just went over in our Bible study at our church up in Kaysville. Paul says this,